Yeah, no, that's better.
So did you get having your Jeep?
We'll do the pledge and call this meeting to order. Pray with me. Lord, thank you for allowing us to gather here today. We ask that you bless us and watch over us. We are grateful for our safety throughout the storm. We ask that you watch over our streets, watch over all of our employees as they keep us safe. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. We need approval of the agenda. It's a special call meeting, so we can't add anything to it. We have a motion to approve.
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda as.
Thank you. Do we have a second? All those in favor? Very good. Mr. Sutton, we're glad to have you here.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. You have the floor, sir.
Is this on?
Oh, no, it's on me.
Self. Okay, now you can hear me. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Council. Thank you, City Manager, Mr. Musselwhite. Appreciate the invitation to come today to talk about what's becoming one of our favorite subjects, which is House Bill 581. I'll try to go over it with you fairly briefly, cleanly, I hope, and be available for any questions that you might have.
Thank you.
First, I should give you a little bit of background, if you don't mind. And this was initiated here in Habersham County by Representative Victor Anderson. He was trying to help us here get a local option sales tax or allow for a cap to allow the county and the cities to participate in the local option sales tax, knowing that the school system already had an e-lost. So the effort was to allow the cities and the counties to also have a lost. It amounted to about a one-sentence change. That bill that he introduced the first week of the legislature morphed into what was later House Bill 1204, I think it was called. And then there was a House Bill 115. And then eventually, after many changes and variations, there was House Bill 581, which is what we're talking about today. It went from about one sentence to 47 pages. So it's complex. It's got three parts to it. Basically, the title is Property Tax Reform and Sales Tax Reform. So it's trying to do two things, and it does two things. But first long section of the bill has to do with how the assessors and the tax commissioner deal with property tax matters and property tax adjustments, and if there's appeals, it cleans up the appeals process, and it does a lot of good things for the tax assessors and the tax commissioners. I have to say that. It was intended to fix some things there, and it did a great job of that. Number two thing is it set a property tax freeze on home exempt properties. So if you have a homestead exemption, that will now be not frozen. It'll be the growth of the property tax digest for that homestead exempt property can only grow at the rate of inflation. Okay, so that's number two. Number three is if all the local governments in the county, so the county, the school board, and the cities all implement this homestead, they don't opt out, and they go ahead and implement this homestead limitation, I'll call it, this inflationary rise. Then they can put out for referendum to the public, allow them to vote to authorize you'd issue what we've called FLOST. Was in the law to begin with. It's no longer in the law, but it initially was titled Flexible Local Option Sales Tax. So that's where that comes from. So this is doing three things, and it all comes back to those three items. So let me talk first about the property tax issues. Effective January 1st, 2025, contingent upon the ratification of the constitutional amendment on November 5th at the statewide referendum, the legislature authorizes statewide floating homestead exemption for all local governments. So that happened, right? We had the referendum. It was approved, I think here by about 65%. Statewide, it was similar to that. So it was a strong approval by the voters. For all local governments, the legislation includes an opt-out provision. So if the city or the county or the school board says, no, I think that's limiting my tax digest growth too much, I'm out. You can do that, but it also precludes then that local government, the county and the cities, from issuing a FLOST. So it's sort of a way to keep everybody in. I have to also mention that even if a city or county opts out, the legislative delegation can opt them back in. So, and I have no idea if that would happen. But that would be a decision that your local legislative delegation would make after this March 1st deadline. This also, it revises the way taxes, revises the tax estimate methodology. There was, the reason I say that, there's a difference between how the state estimated property tax digest and how the local governments, the tax assessors, were required to do that. They were on separate cycles. So one was a year ahead and one was a year behind. They put them together. So they fixed that, which is a very good fix. There was also a 3-year lock. If somebody appeals their property tax and they win the appeal, then the property tax digest can't change for 3 years. And it also requires and codifies that the tax assessors have to do a reevaluation of all the properties in the county every 3 years. That had always been stated, but it was more of a goal than it was a codified mandatory order from the state. Now it's an order
And
from
it's
the
just on the homestead properties. That will not be for all the other.
I think it's for all properties, but you may be correct, Mark. I think it's for all. There's a sales tax ratio study that was, the methodology was different between how the state measured that and how the local governments handled that, so that was corrected. And there's a settlement, if you appeal your property taxes, you have the right to go to a settlement conference. That was suggested before, but now it's the taxpayer's right to do that. So a lot of this is cleanup. It also simplifies the way the caps, sales tax caps. There's, as you know, has been 8 different sales taxes that local governments could participate in. Now there's 9. There's actually more than that. There's some specialty sales taxes that apply to the metro areas. Atlanta, Macon, Augusta, they all have some special. Columbus, they also have some special sales tax that don't apply to the rest of us. Okay. So it covers the groundwater pretty well. So one of the changes is it removes the estimated current base on last year's millage rate. When you're doing the assessment notice, in the past, you've had to indicate the amount of property, the value of the digest, and report. And if you did not roll back the property digest by the amount of inflation, then you had to go through 3 public hearings and announce that to the public. And that was particularly the counties that had to do that. I don't believe it applied to the cities or to the school board. Now they've changed that so that when you're advertising the property tax for this coming year, you have to advertise it at the rollback rate. And if you don't, and if you actually don't, you decide to increase the millage rate to offset that rollback rate, you have to advertise that. So it's a little bit of a change in your advertising methodology. It's really trying to get to the same point, but how you do that and how you advertise it is going to be a little different. There's going to be a disclaimer that is required on the property tax bill if the rollback is exceeded. And so that's really the change. The property tax bill now is going to have a disclaimer on it that says, we Demorest did not roll back the property taxes based on the inflationary increase.
In effect this year?
Yes, yeah. Goes into effect with this bill. Yes, sir. This codifies the requirements of parcels are appraised at least once every 3 years, which I mentioned earlier. There's a 3-year lock if the property value is reduced. So if the homeowner or the business appeals the property value and the assessor, the Board of Equalization reduces that for the property owner, then the digest value for that property stays the same for 3 years. It provides, it removes the provision limiting the fair market value to the sales price for the year after the sale. That means that during the year the sale occurs, the tax assessors are to assess it at the sales price, in theory. But it removes that provision for future years. Also, just a technicality of, it's very important to the tax assessors, but it's sort of a nuance. The statewide floating homestead exemption establishes a base, it exempts the homesteader's digest value from rising more than the inflation rate. And that's determined by the director of, the commissioner of the DOR. Requires approval through a referendum in November, which we already talked about. The exemption allows the assessment of the homesteaded properties to rise only annually at the rate of inflation. The DOR commissioners recently determined that that is going to be at the CPI. Before a few days ago, we didn't know what they were going to use. They had the Department of Revenue had the authority to choose whatever inflation measure they wanted to use, and there's a lot of them. So, but now we know it's CPI. The property value resets with the sale or adjusts with any substantial change to the property. So once even a homestead exempted property, when it sells, it'll sell at the market. It'll reset the price of that digest value at the sales price. Okay, and then it cannot rise faster than the rate of inflation after that.
Do you remember what that CPI was last year?
I can look, you know,
I'm looking it up right now. Here it is.
I was looking at it.
2 as of the latest data, the current CPI is 2.7. And this is over a 2.7 increase over the last 12 months. It just doesn't give you a starting date of that.
so it's down. You know, it's down. In prior years, it was like 7.7, 7.9, 4% 4 years ago. So it has been really pushing up, you know, moving pretty fast. You look at, also looked at Georgia House Price Index, and that's been increasing in the high teens over the last 4 years, which I believe is what's caused this bill. Because if there are tax assessors that are out there that have been trying to keep their local digest at fair market value, they've had to been increasing in the high teens. Now, Habersham County's tax assessor has not been doing that, never has done that. But there, no doubt there are some out there throughout the state that have had these real aggressive changes in property values.
That was on December the 11th of 2024. Is that right? Yeah.
So let me go to, these are the new property tax. One of the big changes, and one of the fundamental changes with this is that it revises the limit of the number of local sales taxes. It keeps local sales tax limit, which you can issue locally, to 2, including the state portion. But it allows for 3 different buckets which are exempt from that 6% limit. So ultimately, with these 3 buckets, you can get another sales tax in each one. So now the limit is 9 pennies of sales tax. So the E-splost is one. The next one is transportation penny, and that can be in the form of a regional T-splost, or it can be a single county T-splost, or transit T-splost, or a MARTA T-splost. You can have any one of those 4 types of T-splost, but only one. Yeah. And then there's an additional sales tax, which is the flossed. Now, however, like I said, there's some metro areas that have a special sales tax. So there's an O-lost, a C-lost, C-splost, a most. Most is only for Atlanta and the cities that are hooked into Atlanta's water and sewer system. That's the most. That's the only purpose of it. There's a C-splost, which is convention splost, which I believe Augusta has. And there's an O-lost, which is Macon, and I think Columbus has one of those too. So, but those are all specialties. So it basically allows us to go up to 9 mils and allows for that flossed. So creates an up to 1% sales and use tax for property tax relief. The only purpose of this floss is 100% property tax relief. So any dollar you get in sales tax, the intention is to lower your property tax by that, your millage rate by that amount. So there's not a direct revenue benefit to you as a city, but there is a benefit in that it can be dramatically lowering your property tax. It could take your 6.6 mil property tax down to somewhere in the range of 2. So you're, instead of being sort of a middle tier or lower, you may be in the lower 40%, probably going to take you to lower 20%, very strong reduction. And that's, of course, the benefit to the citizens, and that's how you would probably talk about this when you're talking about the referendum. The splits between the cities and the counties that have to, in the split between the cities and counties, it can only be split by county, that's cities that levy a tax. And you can't reduce the property tax revenue that a city or county receives more than it receives from the sales tax. So the sales tax can't take you negative, according to law, which here in Habersham, there's two cities that are so close, depending on how you structured this split between the cities and counties, it would take them negative. So you'd have to make adjustments for that. Cities and the county and all cities must have in effect a base year value or adjusted base year value homestead exemption. That means is the base year value is what the county has. It has a property tax freeze. So once the property in the throughout, if you're in the cities or the unincorporated area, for county tax purposes, the homestead properties are frozen. Cities are not. But what this new law says is that unless the city opted out, your increase in value could only rise at the rate of inflation. So they call that an adjusted base year value. So that's just a little bit of terminology, but I'm sure that'll be in, you'll want to notice the difference between an adjusted base year value and an absolute freeze. The distribution between the county and the cities is based on an IGA, which proceeds, which is exclusively for property tax relief. So you're going to have to, just like lost for those cities and counties that receive lost, you're going to need to come up with a tax an IGA and agree to how you're going to distribute these funds. The tax may be levied up to 5 years, but can be renewed by referendum after 5 years. And for that renewal, a local act by the General Assembly is required in addition to an IGA and a referendum. So,
will you explain that process? It'll go on the ballot, and then
before it goes on the ballot, the local legislative delegation is going to have to submit an act through home rule to the state legislature, and they'll authorize you to then go out for a referendum for that 5th year, that renewal after 5 years. Does that make sense? It's a 2-step process, and they don't have it, you don't have to go to the local legislative delegation now because it's been authorized by a statewide referendum. So the voters have put it on the ballot, through the approval of the statewide referendum. That takes care of that. But after 5 years, then the local legislative delegation is going to have to authorize you to do another referendum every 5 years.
let's say 5 years from now, worst case happens and it fails.
In your case, you'd go, you'd then no longer have the rollback. And if you took your 6.6 mil millage rate down to 2.6, let's say, then you'd have to roll it back up to 6.
The problem comes into play because it sunsets. It has to be re-voted on, so you roll it all back. But then you have to pay it back forward because that referendum loses
Right.
that renewal, that's where one of the biggest issues is. Because you'll see here, well, I'll wait till it gets to this chart there, because that's the biggest issue.
So if you look at the second to the last column is rollback in millage rate. That's the benefit to the citizens and to the city is you're able to, with the revenue from the floss, roll back your millage rate. And if the intergovernmental agreement were based on the amount of proceeds each government got from the sales tax. And let's say we assume that that's what you agreed to. Now, you can agree to anything you want to agree to, as far as you could base it on population, you could place it on other things. But if you based it on the amount of the rollback, and everybody got the same millage rate effect, then you can see Habersham County would get 76%. The digest value that's affected is 1.7 million. This is based on 2003, which is the most current I had for everybody. 2023. So the county's millage rate is 12.68 mills, and they receive based on that $1.7 billion digest and 12 mills, they receive $21.8 million, almost $21.9 million. If they received flossed revenue in the amount that they represent in of property tax M&O, if that was the basis for the distribution for everybody, because everybody has the same, you can very accurately measure the property tax digest for M&O. And you said they would get $7.5 million worth of lost revenue, and therefore the remaining property tax would be 14 million. So you're subtracting 7 million from the 21 million and end up with 14 million. That's a 4.38 mil rollback. And so that takes their 12.6 mill rate down to 8.2 mils. So for Demorest, you represent about 2.3% of the digest, the collective digest for the entire community. You're at 6.1, or you were in 2023, sorry. So your property tax revenue back then was $284,000. You would receive $202,000 in flossed revenue, reducing your property tax down to $81,000. And again, that's the same millage rate reduction as everybody else, all the other cities in the county. And your new millage rate would be 1.775. So that would look very good. I think your citizens would very much appreciate that. But as Mark pointed out, that if in 5 years they don't continue to support this, that 1.775 would go back to 6.
Whatever number.
Or whatever number that, now the commission still has, and the council still has total authority on changing the millage rate. That's not restricted in any way. So if you go down to 1.775 because of this rollback, and you say, well, our expenses are up and other things, and so we need to raise the millage rate, you're free to do that. Nothing's restricting you from doing that, but it does change the homestead property values.
The end dollar amount that comes to the citizens in Demorest, where is that calculated from? How is that calculated?
The end dollar, that
Under the floss revenue?
Yes.
it comes from your portion of the total digest. Since you're reducing the, the digest for everybody in order to, one attempt to try to make that fair is that everybody gets the same, enough sales tax as compared to their digest to have the same millage rate reduction.
So the digest number, is that coming from our collected taxes or the?
It's the value of your property. It's the value of the property.
Okay.
So it's a comparison of all the property in the county and in the cities.
Okay.
Let me ask you this, Bill. In the lost revenue of 202,000, what is the difference in that number? If, obviously, I know the math, but why, if we're getting 202 from the lost revenue, how come I'm not rolling that amount?
You are rolling that amount.
All right, but you said the property tax minus lost revenue. How is that number determined? Right to that 81,000.
It's subtract 202 from 284,
Okay,
which
I
is
see
your
that.
property tax revenue. So what you're trying to do is take your property tax revenue and reducing it by the amount you receive in floss.
I got you. Okay.
And your amount you receive in floss is based on your proportion of the property tax digest.
Okay. And guys, one other thing to keep in mind, the first year, we would not do this because we have to collect the money and then roll it back so that when it ends, you got one more year because you'll be collecting this money throughout the year. When we get ready to do the budget, we'll say, okay, we collected $250,000 and this is how much we have to roll back. One thing to keep in mind, our projected property tax revenue for 2025 is $475,000. So it's a little different than 2023. And that's what he's going off of, because he started doing this slide presentations back in June of 24. So that's where that number comes.
And that's all I had at that time. Now we have 2024 numbers, and I'll update this soon.
This is assuming a 1 cent increase in sales tax?
Yes, sir. And it doesn't have to be 1 cent. You can do increments of 0.5%. Why you would do that, I don't know, but
These numbers are based on 1 cent.
on a 1 cent sales tax.
In 2023 numbers.
Yeah, and so this will change. Let me show you, this is a chart that shows what the current millage rate is for each of the jurisdictions in the county, what the flossed millage rate rollback would be, and you can see that's in orange, and that's all the same. Everybody's millage rate rollback is exactly the same. And then in the gray is what your new millage rate would go to. And you see Mount Airy and Alto are both negative. And the law says we can't do that, so we're going to have to make an adjustment there if that's what you decide to do. And like I said earlier, you don't have to use this millage rate, the M&O digest as your method of distribution between the cities and the county. But I can tell you, if you use anything but that, you're going to have more situations like that cities will go negative. And it gets pretty extreme, too, if you use population. So
What is the orange? Explain that.
that's the rollback, the millage rate rollback.
Okay.
And so that's the same for everybody. Everybody rolls.
It's just showing in gray what they're receiving and what the rollback is.
That's after. Okay.
It's just simply subtracting the orange from the blue and getting the gray. And the last slide here is, this just shows what would happen to Habersham as an example. They're right now, this is all the counties in the state of Georgia. It's sort of condensed, so if you read the names across the bottom, it doesn't add up to 159 counties, but they're all in there. So, but Habersham right now would be a little bit above the halfway mark. If they had this flossed in place and were able to reduce their millage rate, their millage rate would go down by 4 mills, which moves them from a little above the middle of the pack to down at about the 25th percentile. So it's 24th percentile to be. So that's also the same benefit for each of the cities. And that's why this is probably something that would be attractive to most of the citizens, is they're going to see a strong reduction in their millage rate.
And then, but pay an additional penny.
But they're going to pay an additional penny on the sales tax side. And of course, people have made the case for many years that local option sales taxes are not only paid by the residents, but they're paid by visitors, tourists, anybody in.
These two we pay the same. So, yeah.
If I come in here from Hall County and buy gas, I'm paying taxes for the benefit of the cities. There are also working on, and I'll give it to Mark in the next week or so once I get it finished, but I think that there's a way to estimate what this is likely to cost the city, and I think it's a fairly small number. It's in the couple of $1,000s per year range. So, because you're talking about an increment, if property taxes are rising, if property values are rising a little bit faster than the CPI, then it's the difference between the fair market value increase and the CPI increase, which is generally going to be a small number, 2-3%, possibly less than that. You have any questions or?
You know how this would affect, like at the county level, the freeze exemption?
That's a good question. It doesn't affect it at all. The county would keep its freeze. It has to, unless it went through some public process. The county has looked before at what it would take to remove its freeze, and they're not interested in going through that process. So they're going to keep the freeze. It's better for the county residents, so you pick whichever one's better for the resident. And in the county's case, their freeze is more advantageous for anybody paying a county tax.
Well, let's talk about.
Wait, refresh my memory. This was on the ballot in
November.
approved by the public, right?
Yes, sir.
When it was approved, was the penny approved? So if we all agree to this, what's the next process for that?
The next process, the authority to have the referendum was approved. As long as you don't opt out, or none of the other cities in Habersham County, as long as they don't opt out, then you can put a referendum on the ballot for November, and the citizens can vote it up or down.
And if one backs out, it's over. We're out. And to play off of that, that's what I was about to say. I had sent y'all an email about having a Zoom meeting with the city managers and the county manager, and or on the phone. And this is the big deal. And so we decided that day on the phone to the meeting to have a county-wide meeting, all the elected officials. And I sent y'all an email saying it was going to be the 23rd. Now it looks like it's going to be the 22nd, which is a Wednesday. And Becky would have to advertise this as a meeting. Some of the group think that all the cities should have their quorum there and vote at wherever the meeting is. And Thomas and I have discussed that some, or we need to be able to be there and say, sign a resolution of some sort, a document of some sort that says, my city is not going to opt out, we're opting in. So that we don't get all the way down the road, and the last day, February 28th, somebody pulls and says, we're out. Because it shuts everybody down from that.
Well, with it really going back on the ballot in November really puts this back in the hands of
It does, but the elected officials right now have to make that decision to give them that right or not.
I mean, I think it needs to be in the hands of the people up there.
Absolutely. But that's where we're
So
at.
those are two, that's a good point that you're talking about, because those are two separate decisions. If you decide not to opt out, you're gonna get the property tax limitation, the property tax growth for non-exempt, or for exempt, for homestead exemption, whether you have floss or not.
That's what you
That's a
got voted
separate
on.
issue. That's a separate
That's what
issue.
you'd be voting on. in
But
the-
you
in
could
the
opt
section.
out and say, no, we don't want that limitation, and then nobody can have a SPOS. But even if you all opt in, then the citizens are going to come in. But you're going to continue to have that limitation on homestead exemption increases forever.
Does that make sense?
That doesn't go away.
Jerry, good
Old trick chair.
All right, say that again. Say the two parts.
The first part is that by February 28th, if you don't opt out, you've got the homestead exemption limitation. So it's only going to increase from now on. The homestead exempt property values will increase based on the CPI.
And that's just
Whether or not
homestead
you
exemption.
whether or not you have flossed or don't have flossed, whether or not the citizens approve it or don't approve it, you still have that limitation unless you opt out. And that's got to be done by March 1st.
Right.
And you'd have to have 3 public hearings, has to be advertised properly, and then you have to approve a referendum to say that we have opted out. But opt in, you don't have to do anything. You just, the assumption is you're just automatically in.
Go back to Bill's, under your property tax procedures. That's the things that is the first part that we get. Because the second part is on page 4 for the statewide, for the floating homestead exemption, which the citizens would have to vote on. So they'll get the property tax changes by us opting in. They'll have the right to vote for SPLOS in November. That comes down to the bottom line of these 2 things. But again, you gotta have 3 public meetings. And does this count as one of those public meetings?
No, I think you have to state,
Like advertises that.
Okay,
I
that's
think
fine.
you would have to state that the purpose of the meeting is to consider opting out.
And you'll see ads in the Gainesville Times right now, where the city of Gainesville, city of Claremont, they're advertising opting out. But that's part of the process of you having these meetings. So to have these 3 meetings, we have to say, we're opting out to advertise it in the paper, correct? So people are gonna think that we're all doing that. I know Dee got a phone call from Victor the other day going, what are you doing? And he goes, that's the process of what we have to do, is we have to have these 3 meetings. You gotta go say you're not gonna do it, and then it's just the way the meetings have to be done.
Are we already starting to advertise this?
We will be, because, again, if we do a community-wide meeting, everybody, the cities and the county would have to advertise that meeting. That be able to count as one of the meetings, even though it may or may not be in your city limits.
I don't think it being in here on the city limits
Would matter?
would much matter, but it would have to be stated that was the purpose.
Well, we would, I think everybody would produce their own advertisements for each city. And that being the case, let's just say it does count. But we still gotta hold 2 more in the month of February.
And you know, you of course have to advertise the location and
Right.
make it available, public will be available.
But if one entity is dead set on opting out, everybody's opting out, right?
No, everybody's in. Everybody, they have to each specifically opt out. You would not be able to have a flossed referendum. So you'd never be able to, so you wouldn't,
That option.
you'd lose the option to have the flossed referendum unless the legislative delegation took the opting out city and put them back in. Then you could do it. So even if you opt out and go through all that pain, you might end up being back in anyway. Now, I don't know what your legislative delegation thinks about that or not.
I don't think there's been any discussion from our part, and none of the city managers mentioned they talked to Bo or Victor or somebody opted out. They could be forced back in.
No.
So it's very confusing, as I told y'all. You'll get to hear this again from Phil on the countywide meeting. And could everybody be available for this? Just, I'm gonna say the 22nd or 23rd. The reason I say the 23rd, the GMA summit starts on the 24th, and Jimmy and I would go down on the 23rd, be ready for class at 7:30 on Friday morning. So I couldn't be there, Jimmy couldn't be there, but as long as I had quorum with y'all there, again, that's what they're asking for, and Thomas will give us some more information whether we have to do that.
One question about us, you said something about us voting with all the cities present.
That's what,
I can see that being a firestorm.
oh, I could too, I don't see that happening, kid, because let's talk about what you and I talked about.
I mean, you can have a joint meeting, but you're right, it's gonna be, I've done it with 2 cities. I've never done it with multiple cities and the county. It would be, I think there would have to be some coordination and some discussion about how that was gonna run, who was gonna run the meeting and all that kind of thing.
So I really don't see that happening. And so that's just one of the things, of suggestions. The other suggestion is that the county said ACCG has a opt-in letter that says our intent is to opt in, that they would hand out.
Now, one thing that I have participated in is that this was a mediation, so it wasn't open to the public. The SDS mediation in Barrow County, we had quorums from the county commission and all the Barrow County cities there, along with a mediator. And I mean, they just did it at a horseshoe, and that actually ran pretty well. But it was not a public meeting, and there was a mediator, court order mediator there who was in charge of keeping everybody in line.
So right now, we're just saying a countywide meeting here, hear any of our sister cities and their elected officials' comments.
Sorry, I forgot to.
Any other questions on this? I think we have some time in 3 meetings to discuss it further.
Thank you.
Everybody, just trying to get everybody even to agree. It's difficult. I just said that again, since Bill told me that they could work either way. I said something second. Anybody else that's could be. Doesn't have a date. It probably would be 5:30 or 6 o'clock. I would think 6 of that.
Thank you, Mr. Sutter.
Thank you very much.
Very much.
Thanks, Bill.
All right, next is consideration of qualifying fees. Mark, you have those fees?
I'm gonna get Thomas the microphone.
I got it. I didn't turn it on before, sorry.
Okay.
Megan's bringing y'all copies of what I've drafted, and I need to explain why I've done what I've done.
All right. Yes, sir.
So this is a little different than you all have seen in the past, well, that this board has seen in the past. In my historical files, previous city attorney in, I think, 2017, the resolution read like the one that I have put before you. You'll see there in the fourth whereas clause, there's a Georgia Code section referenced. And the long and the short of it is that if your elected officials' positions are salaried, your qualifying fees are set at 3% of the salary plus legal supplements. The next section says that if the positions are not salaried, then it is 3% of what people are paid or no more than $35. You all don't get a salary. You get paid per meeting. And the way I read the statute, I don't think that counts as a salary, and therefore the qualifying fees are set at $35. I have no idea why in the past, I guess, 3 cycles, they've been set at $100 for the council and $200 for the mayor. Megan sent me what you all were going to get paid this past year for the meetings that you attended, and I tried to back into the number, and it simply doesn't work. For the council members, it appears that 3% of what they've been paid ranges somewhere between $65 and $70, and 3% of what the mayor made is about $130. So I don't know why things have been done in the past the way they've been done. But this time we took a harder look at it, and so it's by statute, I think it's set at 35.
What prompted taking another look at this?
A paralegal.
It looks very good. Gary said he wants a refund. I'll let you go ahead and tell us what you're willing to get.
It was more than 4 years ago, so you're out of time.
It wasn't.
Mine was only a year.
It was only a year. File an application.
All right, we need a motion to move forward with this resolution.
Make that motion.
Thank you, sir. Do we have a second? All those in favor to move forward with $35? Very good. All right. Next, we have consideration to enter into executive session.
Unless there's need to discuss personnel or contracts, I don't know of anything. I think you all hashed through that last week, did you not?
Does anybody have anything? We need a motion to adjourn.
Oh, sorry. I said unless there's a need to go into executive session to discuss personnel or contracts, I don't know of anything, and I thought you all hashed through that last week. There is a cost of living adjustment in the contract unless you all set another amount.
Can't hear you, man.
I thought, wasn't the contract renewed? I wasn't here last week,
No,
obviously,
we
so,
did not renew. We said we would wait.
okay. So the contract with the city manager does need to be renewed. I understand that there was discussion last week, and,
Y'all are good with it. There was some sort of discussion.
so what the contract requires is that you do need to renew the contract, and then he will receive either a cost of living adjustment, or you all can decide on a different amount, but it can't be both, is what the contract provides for.
With us voting to approve his appointment for another year, does that automatically approve that?
You've approved the contract, but we still need to execute that contract, and the pay amount needs to be determined. So I don't know, unless part of the motion of reappointment last week was the determination of the amount of pay, then that amount needs to be determined, and the contract needs to be executed.
Y'all want to discuss that in executive session, or do we have a motion?
I'll make a motion that we vote on a cost of living raise for Mark's new contract.
This is 3%.
What was that on there?
What was when he completed the public manager course, his salary was increased to 123, 279.20. The COLA provision says the granted to the other whatever cost of living adjustment was granted to the other employees, he's entitled to, or a contract bump.
What was the cost of living?
I don't know the answer.
3%.
So y'all want the math? So adding 3% to that figure would be 126,977.58. A little over $3,600.
Do I need to restate the motion?
This is a special call meeting, isn't it? It'll be retroactive. Because this is a special call meeting, you can't amend the agenda to vote on this, so it'll have to be at the next meeting. But it'll be, because of the contract, it'll be retroactive to January 1.
Okay, very good. We need a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Thank you, sir. A second? All those in favor to adjourn? Thanks, guys.
With their paperwork, I'll take that. Especially the tax info, so we get copies for the public. No, you don't keep them.
Come here. Oh, me.
Okay, you sure did do a good job behaving.
Hey, you want to close the meeting and hit the gavel? You don't want to come over here and hit this? Come over here and hit it. All right.
Last chance.
Going once, going twice. You sure?